just do on his computer. Okay, so what time do you have? I can go ahead and admit these other people then.
I've got two, 10:58, if you want to give them just a second. I have one question for you.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I would like to just check with my program director to see if there's some sort of privacy clause or disclosure that I need.
Just let me know. Just let me know.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I just worry about that because it's different if we're doing it. We don't care, but outside people, they might have some considerations that.
I can't imagine, but we have so many regulations that we have to follow. We have, Americorps policy, the state policy, Red Cross policy. So always want to check. I have a little spiel ironed out. I have a brief sort of, 1-2 minute, and then I have a good 6-minute spiel if they have more questions. If it's a lot of people, I think I might start by introducing just the position itself so that they have a good bulk information, then I can answer any questions. If it's a few people, or maybe people filter in and out, then maybe I'll start with the smaller version and answer questions as they come.
Yeah, that sounds fine. You never know how these things go. If people come in late, then they leave early, or it's interesting though. It's totally different than
it is. And we get to see people's houses, which is interesting, Like, I'm like, oh, do I have any books back there that maybe I shouldn't have up there?
Otherwise, it looks fairly blank.
Yeah, I turned my thing around so that it's mostly a white wall, but okay, let me just make sure I don't have any final messages.
Yeah, well, we don't have too many people yet. I think when I looked at, there were like 13. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, we could try it again too if you feel like, oh, we didn't get a good turnout. You never know.
Wonderful.
It's up to you. Whatever you want to do is fine. It's nice to get relationships going with different organizations. Okay, so do you want me to go ahead and?
Well, I'm sorry, I have one email.
Oh, no problem. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. Also, Carol, I have worked with a few people at the UIC office, and I don't think your name has come up. So maybe Melissa.
Oh, Missy. Yeah,
Missy. Laura.
Who?
Laura.
Laura, I think, is through public health.
Oh, no, there's two Lauras. There's a Laura through public health.
And there's Lauren at LAS. She's in LAS career development. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, well, that's good to know then that you're connected with them too.
You had just mentioned, building relationships with different organizations, and I thought I've spoken to somebody at UIC before, so.
Yeah, okay, good.
All right, I am ready if you want to start.
Well, let me just go ahead and admit some people here, and then I see people are coming. Hello. They're connecting to audio. Hi. So I'll just keep monitoring who's coming.
Okay. Carol, do you advise I wait a little bit until everyone's loaded up?
Yeah, okay. It looks like people are still connecting. Oh, I hear some people now.
Hello.
Okay. Here, this is we got some new people. I'm admitting some other new people. So we're gonna wait until we admit some more people, and then we'll get started just in a moment.
Okay, wonderful.
Good morning.
Jaime, are you there? This is my colleague, Jaime. You can kind of see his little face, and
his little face.
Jaime, nice to meet you.
His little face in the corner there.
Yeah, let me explain that. I call this my virtual business card. I don't have my cam on because my apartment's very unique. To be completely honest, I'm a semi-retired DJ, so I basically live in a recording studio, and it has a lot of stuff on there, a lot of collectibles, and it's just really distracting. So as I'm advising students, I tell them don't have a distracting background. So I created my virtual background. So this is one of the backgrounds that I use when I'm in meetings.
Gotcha. Very creative solution to that.
Yep. Okay, well, Theodora is our presenter today. She's with Americorps Red Cross. And so I'm just gonna, my name is Carol Costin. I work in the Career Services Office at UIC. So if you ever have any questions about jobs or you wanna make an appointment with our office, feel free to reach out. But Theodora is our new partner. And she's going to talk a little bit more about Americorps and the Red Cross and what positions they have and why it's a good idea to work for them and those kinds of issues. But if we, at some point, we can unmute you because we don't have a lot of people here today so far. Oh, here's more people coming. Or if you feel more comfortable, just type something in the chat box. But I'll just hand it over to Theodora and she can just get started then. Thanks, Theodora, for doing this.
Of course. Thanks for the introduction, Carol. Good morning, everybody. You can all hear me okay? Oh, none of you have videos on, but Carol, you can hear me good? Hi, May, you can hear me? Wonderful. Yes. Sometimes I've started these left on mute, so I just want to make sure. So my name is Theodora Varellis. I am calling you from my home right now, but typically I work at the American Red Cross of Greater Chicago. I lead an Americorps disaster response team out of that office. We are currently recruiting for Illinois Disaster Corps members to work out of both the Chicago office and other American Red Cross offices across the state of Illinois. So for those of you that are not familiar with Americorps or maybe not with the American Red Cross, I'm just going to do a brief intro to the both of them, and then I'll talk about the position itself and some of the benefits of actually working with us. So to start off, Americorps is very similar to the Peace Corps in that it's a U.S. federally supported national service program. There are programs across the entire country. There are a million of alumna of the Americorps program. We are a state and national program, which means that instead of having members travel around to different organizations and different communities in need, members are hosted for the full term of their contract at a social service organization, in this case, the American Red Cross, and they serve out of that office alongside the staff and volunteers that also work there. So our Americorps members working at the American Red Cross, let me just give you a little bit on what we do at Red Cross. So I'm sure you've heard Red Cross is a nationally known, internationally recognized humanitarian organization. Our mission statement is to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by channeling the power of our volunteers and the generosity of our donors. So the disasters or emergencies that we deal with most commonly in the Illinois region are home fires, widespread and then also localized flooding, and storms or tornado damage. Obviously, with the pandemic happening right now, we are doing sort of pandemic-related response in the capacity that is approved of by public health officials, and I'm happy to talk about that more in detail if you're curious. But typically, we do focus on hazard-based emergencies, such as like weather or geological events, earthquakes, that sort of thing. We are currently recruiting for Illinois Disaster Corps members. So I realize that we have Americorps, Illinois Disaster Corps, and then American Red Cross. So American Red Cross is our host organization. Americorps is the name of the program that sort of sends you to our host site. And then the Illinois Disaster Corps is the name of our program. So that's how we've been branded. And the Illinois Disaster Corps is unique in that we have a dual mission. Not only are we responsible for doing disaster response for the American Red Cross, but we also have a mission statement to the state of Illinois Office of Emergency Operations and Management. So we can be deployed to respond to state-based emergencies as well. So it's a really cool opportunity. We get a lot of exposure in these roles, and I myself as an alumna of this program can talk to you about it as, you know, being an Americorps member myself, and then also what it looks like more globally. We are looking for Americorps members to start as early as July 13th or as late as early fall 2020. The contracts are 11 months long. Members are expected to work 38 to 40 hours per week. Obviously, there are PTO days, sick days built into that affects the average of hours that are actually worked per week. This is a stipend position. So I just want to be clear that it doesn't count as full-time employment in the traditional sense, but it's definitely a career springboard. So members receive a living stipend that is distributed bi-weekly. That comes to a total of $14,279. Members are eligible for healthcare benefits, childcare benefits, They receive extensive career training and retraining in humanitarian services and disaster response from the American Red Cross, which is one of the world's oldest humanitarian organizations. And then there is an education award received at the end of a member's term that totals $6,195, which can be used either to pay back federal or other qualifying student loans or to pay for future expenses. Not to mention that you then become a part of a massive alumna of Americorps members and Red Crossers. So it's a really great networking, career advancing opportunity. That was a lot of information. I can talk a little bit about what the position does itself. I can talk about the application process. Does somebody want to take themselves off mute and ask what questions they have or which section they'd like me to talk about? Don't be shy. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Ho.
Do you have a question?
So far, no.
Okay, then I'm happy to launch into what members actually do. Like, what does the day-to-day task involve? So our Americorps members are trained in the full cycle of disaster services. For anyone that's not familiar in what that is, and I myself wasn't familiar when I became a member as well, so you don't need to have training or education in disaster response of any kind. And I'll talk about qualifications a little bit later. Full cycle of disaster preparedness at the top. You've got response, so that's after a disaster strikes, and then you've got recovery at the end. So it sort of falls into a circle, and our members are fully trained in all three steps. And then their day-to-day responsibilities fall into those three different categories. So members do a lot of community outreach and relationship. If you're interested in working at social service organizations in Chicago, this is a great way to sort of get your foot in the door into that community. I, as a member, worked with 50 different community partnership sites. And being somebody that didn't study in Chicago, this was a really good way for me to make relationships with other really large and small social service organizations. Members spend most of their time doing disaster preparedness. So they teach youth and adult disaster readiness and preparedness classes, including full certification classes. So we provide free certification for CPR, first aid, and AED training for all of our members. So for example, I myself am a CPR first aid instructor, and all of our members get that training for free. It usually costs somewhere around $400. So we're really happy that we can train our members so they can walk away with all these certifications. So a lot of time is spent doing disaster preparedness. We've also got the disaster response recovery aspect. So our members work as disaster caseworkers. They help families that have been affected by home fires, flooding, tornadoes, other sort of storms that happen in Chicago. So in Chicago, we have about 3 to 10 home fires a day. We work very closely with the fire department. And so we get notified when there are family members who've been affected by a home fire. Maybe they lost, one floor of their home. Maybe they lost their entire home. Maybe there was a fatality because of that emergency. So we work with those families and we help them figure out where they're going to live, help them with recovery. We connect them to our internal resources and then external community partners as well. So there's a little bit of social service, social work to that. And then I just want to mention the disaster response portion because that's really exciting. And that also is in our name. We're the Illinois Disaster Corps team. So Americorps members, they can deploy in 2 functions. One would be as an American Red Crosser, and that could be either for a local event, so something here in Chicago, could be for a regional event. For example, I drove to Moline, Illinois, which is right along the Mississippi border, if you're not familiar, last year as an Americorps member myself to work on a flood response that happened there. And then we can also deploy to national events. So I myself deployed in this past fall, so September 2019, to Tropical Storm Imelda in Texas. So it really depends on what the need is, but our Americorps members get trained up to then be flown out, driven out, hosted, lodged at a disaster response operation, which is really cool to witness. And then they get to work alongside staff and volunteers from the country or region doing that kind of response work. And then the other deployment capacity we have is to deploy for the state of Illinois, as I mentioned earlier. We have a very specific capacity. So after an emergency strikes, there are usually lots of well-meaning local citizens that want to help out, but without disaster training or affiliation with a social service organization, they can often not be utilized in the best means possible. So the Illinois Disaster Corps team, led by myself and my current team right now, we set up what's called a volunteer reception center. We basically drive out to the site of an emergency, we find a facility, and we set up a process to register, train, and then divvy up interested volunteers from the community so that they can actually be used by local organizations. So we just streamline that process. There's a lot of human resource management so that we can help the local city officials respond most appropriately to the disaster. And we also work with unsolicited donations. So after disaster, people often drop off goods, supplies, organizations and businesses drop off water or emergency response supplies like tarps or trash bags or cleaning supplies, and all of that, which is very well-meaning, needs to be managed somehow. So our team, all of our Americorps members of the Red Cross get trained up in how to do this sort of emergency response and processing after disaster actually strikes. So one of the big qualifications for this role is to be willing to deploy within 24 to 48 hours to the scene of a disaster across the state of Illinois. We obviously provide for transportation and housing, and you get a meal card, so the expense doesn't fall on the member, but it really does take sort of an extraordinary person who's willing to sort of get up from their life and travel to the scene of a disaster to help out the local effort. We obviously provide a ton of training, so you're never going in blind. There's lots of leadership. You've got both your team and me is there as well. And this role, so if I can, let me pause for a second, see if we have any questions, then I'll talk about the qualifications and skills.
Yeah, we had some latecomers come in, so maybe you want a little bit background or to catch up a little, that's fine. If anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself and just ask, or you can type in the chat box. Either way is fine.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, hello,
I was gonna
everyone.
say, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No
I
problem.
just wanted to ask you, what's your background? Like, what did you study in college? And
That's a
what
great
made
question.
you interested in getting into this?
So I studied at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I did international studies with a focus on global health and African studies. And I am interested in doing international humanitarian aid, specifically with displaced populations, so refugees and other sort of internally displaced populations. And so I had spent a good 4 to 6 months, 4 and then 2 other months. So cumulatively 6 months working with refugees in Greece at a refugee camp and refugee aid organizations. I'm Greek American, so I very much felt called to that specific migration crisis. And I worked with lots of small organizations, and I realized that it's really hard to get proper training in disaster response unless you work with an organization that is a really long legacy. And the Red Cross has basically created the standards, the playbook for how to do humanitarian disaster response. There's a chapter in every single country, every state of the United States. They're older than the UN, they're older than the League of Nations. They have just an incredible history. And so by joining Americorps, I got all this free training, all of this context and history. I learned about, international humanitarian values. I got to connect with other people who were humanitarian minded. So after coming back from my refugee work in Greece, I realized I want to link up with a really well-experienced organization, did my Americorps term, and then was offered a staff position as well. And so I do want to note that a lot of people that work at the American Red Cross in Chicago, actually across the country, were previously Americorps members. So we very much take care of our own, and it's a great step in the door. Our regional disaster response officer, so he's the person in charge of all disaster operations in Chicago. He was an Americorps member himself for a good 12 years. So we take good care of our Americorps members. You're never doing administrative work. You're always doing what you've signed on to do. And we look for every opportunity for career exploration and development. And Red Cross is really huge. So kind of an endless opportunity to learn and grow. But I hope that answered your question, Carol. I'm happy to do a little re-intro for those of you that have just joined.
I was just going to ask you too, you said it's a great springboard. So do you find sometimes maybe biology majors do this and then they decide to go to medical school? Or?
Yes. So we have, from my own experience, I've known 3 members who graduated the program and then went on to social work school. One, actually, he just finished last week. He is starting his master's at, I'm sorry, he's starting medical school at Loyola this July, so we've definitely got the medical side as well. We have 2 EMTs in the program right now who want to sort of do a shift. They also have a medical background. I myself am interested in public health in the future, getting a master's in public health, so it definitely draws the public health crowd, medical sciences, humanitarian social services, so education, public administration, we don't have a prerequisite degree type. Honestly, you need to be willing to work with a diverse group of people, willing to be flexible, willing to meet the client's needs where they are, and be comfortable balancing that. It can be challenging to do disaster response. It's definitely not your day-to-day job. And then there are much less stressful elements of the job. For example, I taught about 3,000 people in Chicago, just myself, last year as an Americorps member. So we do a lot of community outreach. I was working in neighborhoods across Chicago, in communities where people didn't look like me, where English wasn't the first language, or maybe they were new arrivals to the country. So we definitely need sort of members that have a universal humanitarian outlook on the world, but you don't need to have any sort of prerequisite other than showing a willingness and a commitment to doing public service.
Okay, Theodora, we have a couple of questions. One question is, do they need to have a vehicle to?
No, you just need reliable transportation. So the Red Cross has a fleet of vehicles. So if you were deployed somewhere, if you needed to go teach a CPR class, you would be, you'd register with our facilities team and we would send you off in a vehicle. Obviously, we need to know that you can arrive, when we work in the office, we need to know that members can arrive to an office reliably, whether that's public transportation or maybe they carpool with a neighbor. That is truly fine as long as we know that they can get to the office reliably. We provide all transportation outside of that.
What if you don't drive?
That's a tricky one. Unfortunately, we do need all of our members to drive, or at least be willing to get a driver's license and be comfortable driving in Chicago. So most of our members during what's called blue sky, so when there isn't a disaster actually happening, members spend about 2 to 3 days a week actually driving out to community sites, working on the south side or maybe on the west side or the north side, wherever their jurisdiction is, wherever we sort of give them to focus their community outreach. They have to be willing to drive there using a Red Cross vehicle, and obviously you need a driver's license in order to do that. So that is probably one of our more limiting restrictions, is that you do need to have a driver's license. And on this note, let me just mention some of the other qualifications. You must be at least 18 years of age, a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, have a college degree or comparable work experience, interested in working with a diverse cross-section of individuals, especially youth, and then comfortable working both as a team, especially if you're deployed. It's really important that you have good communication and interpersonal skills, but then also that you're comfortable working virtually. So when members are working in the office, obviously right now we're all working virtually, and I'm happy to talk about that in a moment, but when we work in the office, members create their own schedules, they teach their own classes, they're very much, we're expecting them to take this on and sort of have the initiative to manage their own schedules and do their own community outreach. So you have to be driven for sure.
There's another question. Do you have any positions that are remote only? Or it sounds, if you can just talk, I think that's the question that one person is asking, or do you have to be flexible to be able to work remotely and work in the field and that kind of thing?
That is a great question. So we are all working remotely right now, just given COVID-19. So since March 13th, the Americorps team and almost all of the American Red Cross has been working virtually. However, the nature of our team, as the Illinois Disaster Corps, we have to be available to physically deploy someplace. Now, we understand that there are health concerns, especially now. So we would never force a member to travel someplace that was unsafe for them, especially if they had, they disclosed to our HR department that they have underlying health conditions. But that the expectation is that without a documented reason for being unable to deploy, a health medical reason, a disability that's registered with our department, they would be expected to deploy in person. So unfortunately, we don't have any positions that are purely virtual. I can tell you that the Red Cross has plenty of volunteer positions. Obviously, they're not stipended, they don't have the AmeriCorps benefits. So if you still are interested in doing disaster response, there are plenty of positions that are purely virtual, even before COVID-19. I'd be happy to share like a link so that participants could do volunteer work too if they want. Carol, I'm happy to send that to you after.
Okay, yeah, I can always send out information to the students since we have them register in advance. So any follow-up, I can get that out to them.
Wonderful, but that's a great question. I know it's kind of precarious right now in these circumstances.
Did you want to, for the people that came late, maybe you want to tell them again what the stipend is and what benefits you get? Because yeah, I realize, but for a first job out, you know, maybe almost like a gap year, it might be that some of these students are taking a gap year or something like that to get more experience and really maybe find out what they really want to do and that kind of thing. So,
and I myself took a gap year as well between college, high school and college. So I highly encourage it. It very much helps with sort of career exploration. So our living stipend is paid out bi-weekly, and it comes to a total of $14,279. We don't ask that members consider it as a salary because it is not. It's purely a supplemental living support. And there's more details on that on the Americorps webpage as well. Members are eligible for healthcare and childcare benefits. In addition to all the free CPR first aid, instructor trainings, professional development trainings that are all free, members receive an education award at the end of a successful term. So if you've completed all the hours on your contract, they receive an education award called the SIGA Award of $6,195. Now, it is important to note that there is a long list of universities and institutions that will double that. It's called a scholarship match. So if you are interested in that, you should look up SIGA Award match, and then it lists all the institutions that if you've received this $6,195 education award, if you're interested in going for your master's, many schools will purely match that 100%. That would be 12,000 plus in automatic scholarships, which is really great. And then those can be used to either pay for future educational expenses if you're planning on continuing school, or to pay back qualifying student loans.
Great. Any other questions?
I realize it's a ton of information. Obviously, I know this stuff like the back of my hand, so I might have skimmed over something that didn't make sense. I'm happy to do a little.
I had a question. So earlier when you were saying the requirements, you said something about college degree. I wasn't sure if you were saying that we need to have a full diploma or any of it. I kind of got a little confused there.
No problem. Happy to repeat that. That is an important part, especially since we talked about gap years. So typically we ask our members to have completed their college degree, a bachelor's degree of some kind, or comparable work experience. So if you're able to demonstrate either through the volunteer work you've done or part-time jobs or internships that you've done that you would be a good fit for this position, then you don't need a degree. So it's not purely degree based. We've definitely had applicants that have a degree but don't have, the volunteer experience or the other work experience to show that they would be a good fit. It is a full-time commitment, though. I do want to stress it. We're not an internship, so it's really tricky to do school and this at the same time because we are expecting members to be working either on their computer or when we work in person at the office from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Now, of course, if there's a deployment of some kind, then it gets kind of tricky. Deployment expectations, you could be working 8 hours a day or you could be working 12 hours a day. It really depends on the type of deployment and how intense or how bad the emergency is. Usually, really large-scale emergencies don't happen more than once in a member's term. I myself was deployed to Tropical Storm Imelda, and that was in Texas. I think I worked maybe 75, 80 hours for 2 weeks, and then of course you get a few days off to recuperate afterwards because we want you guys to be at your best. So we definitely realize the hardship that a deployment does cause, and so it's as much of a commitment as it is. There's definitely room for breaks and self-care.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the application process.
Yes, absolutely. So as an Americorps program, we go through the typical Americorps webpage. They have a portal. You have to create sort of a generic portal, and then you link your application, your profile, to our application. So if you go onto our webpage, you'll see the bit.ly link, you'll click it and it'll take you to the place where you can actually create your application. Of course, I'll share those links with Carol. The application is pretty extensive. It requires a mission statement, full job history, full volunteer service history, and 2 professional references. That can either be a student, a clergy member, a mentor, a professor, a previous boss. We're not too picky on the type of professional reference. We just want them to be able to demonstrate your professional capacity. After we've received a full application, including at all your employment history and all the hours you've worked at those places and reasons for leaving, our Americorps program specialist will reach out for a phone screening, and this is the first step. So at that screening, it's not an interview. She is just going to talk to you about what the position is actually like, to make sure that you understand our expectations, to see if it fits well with your career goals and your interests. That is a very informal conversation to help you make sure that this is a good fit for you. And then if our program specialist decides that you're a good fit for our program, you'll get passed on to the formal interview process, which in this environment has been virtual team calls. Typically video is expected just so that we can meet each other and get some rapport. It's done in a panel session, and I would probably be on the call, plus our program director, Michelle Bush, and then one other staff member from the Red Cross. And we do a round robin of questions, and then we spend about 30 minutes. We leave for the applicant to ask questions of us, ask us about our experience with Americorps, how we got to the Red Cross. So again, as an interview process goes, it's a little more lengthy, but it's definitely more informal than a lot of other organizations. Once the interview has been completed, you'll get a response from us within 2 to 3 business days. And then if you are extended an offer or a contract, there'll be about 2 to 4 weeks of paperwork, background checks, onboarding documentation, which obviously we would help you through extensively and communicate with you about. And it can be done as soon as 2 weeks, depending on how long our background checks take, or it could take as long as 4 weeks if there are sort of any hitches or unexpected delays in the background check process. All right.
Sounds like you have to be really passionate to do
this. You do. It's really great. The team members here, very self-driven, very committed, all interested in different things. So we've got one member now who's interested in environmental sustainability, and she wants to end up working for FEMA doing environmental mitigation. We've got one member right now who's interested in political science, as I was, and so he's interested in going the more policy government route. We've got one member, like I said, who is an EMT, so she's interested more in medical route. We had social workers before, so it is a very good introduction to the social service or public sphere, if those are career paths that you are interested in. Any questions, any comments from the crowd? Don't be shy.
Or type in if you have a question, if you don't want to unmute
that
yourself.
works as well.
Hi, May, you have any questions? You're usually a talker. Or Crystal? Crystal, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask this.
Sure,
I don't know. I don't know if it was this close earlier before I joined because I came a little late. What is the difference between a member and a volunteer? Because a member.
That is a great question. That's a tricky one too. Even our staff members get confused sometimes. So the Red Cross is 95% volunteer run, which is a miracle in and of itself, meaning that only 5% of all Red Crossers in the world are actually full-time employed staffers. So a volunteer has the same sort of full-time commitment. There's just no benefits or remuneration of any kind. Our Americorps members very much fall in between staff and volunteer, right? So it's a little more of a unique position in that they do get, a bi-monthly stipend that's paid out to their bank accounts. They do have healthcare and childcare benefits, and they get this education award at the end. So those are the 3 differences between a volunteer and Americorps member. A volunteer can do this voluntary work for their entire careers. I've met people that have been volunteers for 60 years. Whereas an Americorps member purely commits to the contract length. So 1,700 hours of service over 11 months of service, as much as 1 year total, which looks like about 38 to 40 hours a week of work. Does that answer your question, Crystal?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. I just was a little confused there.
Totally.
Okay, we have another question. Somebody's asking about, it sounds like they're more interested in just volunteering. So they should they just go to the Red Cross website and check that
If you
out?
type in Red Cross volunteering opportunities, Illinois or Chicago or wherever you live, you will find a bunch of opportunities. I will tell you that the volunteer onboarding process can be long just because we work with vulnerable populations. So it's really important that we properly train our volunteers, that we do some background checks and that sort of thing. So don't be discouraged if it's taking a little bit longer than it would say than walking up to a food pantry to start volunteering somewhere. We definitely want volunteers, especially now in the virtual environment. So please don't be discouraged by that at all.
And I just want to confirm that volunteers do not get any remuneration. I think that, what about a certificate, or do they get something to kind of maybe verify that they were a volunteer, or is there a requirement in terms of hours or anything else?
It depends on the role that they choose. So for example, we have disaster action responders. They serve as a 12-hour on-call shift, and they are asked to respond, and right now we're doing this virtually, obviously, a home fire, flood, or other sort of mass client event in the city of Chicago within an hour of being phone called. So that, for example, you have to commit to a 12-hour shift, which is a lot, 1 to 2 times a week. Now we have some opportunities that are, let's say, casework, for example. You commit to maybe 1 shift a week, maybe 3 shifts a month at most, and those shifts are only 4 hours long. Also very virtual. So it really depends on the type or the line of service that you want to do. Not all of them are as extensive. You can be deployed as a volunteer as well. You don't need to be deployed through Americorps, for example. So if you are interested in doing logistics, for example, working in the warehouse and moving emergency response materials so that they can be distributed to families that have been hit by a tornado or whose homes have been flooded, that's definitely an opportunity too. The more complicated the task, the more training is expected. So that is, and then if the training is more extensive, they will ask for a greater commitment. So, but that all gets very well explained by our disaster workforce team, who will walk you through the onboarding and the training process. So there shouldn't be any surprises. And you're welcome to, at any time, say, you know what, this is a commitment I can't make anymore. Can I pivot to something that's less time sensitive? Or maybe I love this and I want to pick up another line of service.
Okay, so we have a question. So I think it's just, maybe it's confusing, but as a disaster corps member, that's like a full-time job. So you can't, you couldn't do it while being a college student at the same time.
Not an undergrad college student, exactly. We do have some people that they do like an online master's program that meets, once a month in person. Otherwise, the rest of it's online or maybe evening classes. That could be workable based on whether or not you think you can truly juggle the time commitment. But for a full-time undergraduate student, I highly recommend if you will be enrolled, that you wait until after you graduate so that you can make a true commitment.
Unless they want to just volunteer. Awesome.
Yeah, unless you want to volunteer too. And you can volunteer on the weekends or evenings, or there's a lot more flexibility with when you want to volunteer. Other questions? Concerns?
Well, if I could just add to that, in terms of what Theodora was saying, you do pick up some great skills, some good transferable skills, especially if you're thinking about pursuing careers in public service. So one of my other roles is I'm president of the GCRC, the Government College Relations Council, and we promote careers within government, local, state, and federal. And so that type of experience is something that's really valued by many agencies in government. So this is some really great experience that will help you out throughout the lifetime of your career. And just so you know, too, we have a few sessions coming up. There's one today, actually, at 1 o'clock if you're interested in jobs with the IRS. And then tomorrow we have a 2 o'clock on the various federal agencies as well. And then we have another one next week. So there's plenty of opportunities. You can look at our website. I'll put the link up for the one tomorrow, because tomorrow we have several agencies that are going to be presenting on opportunities with their agencies. It includes HUD, Health and Human Services, and I forgot who else we're going to have on there. So
that's wonderful.
So being in Americorps, is there, you know how the federal government has the STEP system or the STEP,
Yes.
are you filtered into that system or are they?
I don't think we are formally, so some AmeriCorps programs do. Vista, for example, it's considered almost as equivalent to a first year of work in a public service job with the government. AmeriCorps doesn't have the same documentation. The state and national program that we have doesn't have that same sort of entry level, but I can tell you from my experience working with our state representatives that AmeriCorps members do get chosen over a member or an applicant that doesn't have AmeriCorps experience.
Anybody have any other questions?
Oh, I see a question here from
Oh, okay, go
Brian
ahead.
Castro. Are positions now open for the summer via, oops, hold on, let me, where's my, one second guys, let me just check the chat. Okay. Are the positions now open for the summer via the AmeriCorps website? Yes, so there definitely, so speaking of AmeriCorps more broadly, there definitely are positions available through the AmeriCorps website. Now, I will just caution everyone that due to COVID-19, a lot of programs have had to pivot to virtual service. The AmeriCorps at the Red Cross has been doing virtual work for a while, and we've just had that capacity, so it's been a lot easier for our program to pivot. So for example, if you've got, you know, let's say the Greater Chicago Food Depository, they might have different opportunities available now than they would during non-COVID times, just due to proximity of working in a warehouse, that sort of thing. There are positions available. Typically, AmeriCorps contracts are 11 months long. Some programs will offer shorter. You can have as short as 5 months. That would be as close as you can get to sort of a summer AmeriCorps term. Although I will just advise everyone that we are starting a new grant cycle in July, so most programs will be recruiting for an 11-month term of service from their members. Any other questions? Let me just make sure that I answered everything in the chat. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think I mentioned, Carol. You asked if there's a certificate or verification of volunteer service. If a certificate is needed for an employer or for an educational program, maybe it's part of your you know, capstone or field experience for your degree, we can absolutely provide like a certificate of participation. The Red Cross can provide, you know, the start and end date of your voluntary service, or explain that you're, you know, you're currently active volunteer as well. So we can definitely vouch for you all if that is needed.
Or if they put you down as, say, an employer or something like that, they would have those records that you did volunteer maybe with them.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
I have a question. Well, it's more like a, I don't know, like a comment. You were saying earlier how you were interested in public policies and you were also doing the volunteer work. How did it, what's the word? How did it work together and how does it help you like expand more in the career path for you?
So I think I had mentioned that for one of our current members, he's interested in public policy. In any sort of public policy role, it's really important to know what life is like on the ground and what it looks like to serve the public, right? In order to provide policy advice and guidance. Obviously, you can take policy work in any direction, right? You know, it can be an education policy advisor, a health advisor, disaster response advisor, any sort of different department like that. So this provides a really great insight into a large public service organization that has a ton of state and government representation and buy-in. I mean, our national mission statement has been endorsed by Congress. I mean, we very much have a close working relationship with our government partners, because when a state of disaster is declared, it very much isn't up to the Red Cross whether or not we can respond. We need permission from the state entity with whom we are working. So we've got a lot of those relationships built. It very much guides the work that we're doing. So as an AmeriCorps member, you get to see what it's like to navigate in those relationships, see what it's like to serve clients, to balance how the partnerships are balanced and the leadership level. So to answer your question, it gives you a really good peek at what it's like to do public service work so that it can inform policy making.
All right, thank you very much.
Other questions, concerns about Americorps, about Red Cross in general?
If you do have questions about your career path, how to explore careers, that sort of thing, you can always call our office. We're working virtually right now, but we can set up an appointment. We can do video conferencing sessions with you. So if that's,
I did see a question in the chat.
yes, go ahead.
So what does the 9 to 5 day look like? Is it different every day depending on the disaster response? That is a great question. Whew. So as I mentioned earlier, and perhaps you weren't on during that time, at the Red Cross, we split our work into what's called blue skies or steady state operation, and then gray skies or disaster response. So when there's a disaster response happening, you're very much given a specific assignment, and that's what you do. So for example, if you're deployed to a hurricane and you're doing casework, you likely would be going to hurricane evacuation or temporary congregate shelters, working with clients that have been displaced, working on the computer, or maybe working a phone line to answer clients' questions about how they can get services, how they can recover, to help advise their recovery process. So that's what a disaster response could look like. It could be phone-based, could be field-based. You could be working face-to-face with the client depending on the emergency and the times. In our steady state operations, our members have, due to COVID-19, our services have expanded quite a bit. So we used to focus predominantly on providing disaster preparedness and education to youth and adults. So when we work in person, typically our work looks like a member could come in at 9 a.m., answer emails, phone calls, schedule classes with community partners, maybe take a Red Cross vehicle and canvass their neighborhood they've been assigned to leave flyers about our classes, leave their business cards, introduce themselves to the alderman, introduce themselves to a community organization or a community center, and start scheduling CPR first aid classes, youth preparedness classes, and then go out and teach those classes. So you might schedule some classes in the morning, do a neighborhood canvassing event of some kind. In the afternoon, teach a youth class at an elementary school, and then come back, do a little bit of administrative work, so reporting your numbers. It's really important to capture the value, the impact of your work, so we want to make sure that we get those numbers down. And then the next day could be spending 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. talking to home fire clients that fire affected clients, so clients that have been affected by home fires. And maybe you're connecting them to our health services department. Maybe you need to connect them to our disaster mental health line. Maybe they're very traumatized. Maybe they just want to know where they can find the local food pantries. And so there's a lot of on the moment troubleshooting and client assistance, which is really interesting if you're interested in social work. It teaches you how to be sort of aware of what social services are out there. So if you're interested in going to social service after this Americorps position, this is a really good way to start. And you might have, let's see. I want to provide sort of what a day-to-day looks like right now, because if a member is starting, so if any of you are interested in applying and you end up starting in July or August, our days look much different. So right now I can give you an example of one of my members. This is the member that was interested in policy. This morning he's working on a communications report with our communications department. He's obviously being trained how to do that. In the afternoon, he's going to be calling biomedical volunteers so that they can host a blood drive. So he's staffing volunteers at a blood drive so that we can collect blood, which is obviously in dire need right now. In a little bit later in the afternoon, he's going to be working with our information and planning department to work on a data related project. And then let's say, from 1 to 4 p.m., he'll be doing casework over the phone with clients that have been affected. So a day can be super varied. We provide a ton of training. Members are expected to commit to the job description, the duties in the job description, and then any duties that we add on to that due to COVID-19. So for example, if you're not very data focused or you're not interested in that, you don't have to do a data project. We could pivot you, for example, to work with our service to the Armed Forces Department and do casework for their department, for example. Or you could work with our dispatch team. So they work what's called our dispatch line. So very similar to a 911 operations center. You get calls from either the police department, fire department, or other community agencies to help get our disaster responders to the scene of an emergency. So it's very much a coordinating external communications role, which is really interesting if that's something that you're interested in the future. So I hope, Brian, that answered your question. Very diverse. Oh, sorry, it was Rebecca, excuse me. Varies very much. I'm happy to talk more in depth with anyone one-on-one or maybe offline if they have any more questions as well. I realize that we're getting close to the end. It's 11:48.
So it's just, yeah, Brian, let's see, he was just asking about your experience working in Greece with the refugees.
Yes. So just a tidbit on that, since it's a little bit off focus. So because I am Greek American, I do speak sufficient enough Greek. And I have worked with, I've been trained in trauma-informed care. I worked at a distribution center at a refugee camp in central Greece, where we distributed food and non-food items to refugees who were not allowed to travel any further. They arrived in Greece and then were sort of trapped there due to the immigration asylum system that is in place in Europe right now. So there's a lot of politics behind that I won't get into, but our day-to-day job is handing out food, working with refugees to get their needs met, distributing clothing. That was the refugee side, a refugee camp. The second time I returned to do this sort of work, I realized that, a good 60-70% of refugees around the world are living in urban centers and not in isolated camps. And so I pivoted my focus a little bit and I stayed in Athens instead of going to a refugee camp. And I worked at a community day center for displaced young male refugees. And then it also had a partner side where they worked with, it was a housing, like a temporary housing situation for female refugees that were escaping violence and other sort of trauma like that. So that was a day-to-day working with clients, working with refugees, working alongside refugees as well, very much because I don't speak all the languages that refugees speak. So we partnered with a lot of the clients that we serve to provide services, food, technology for a lot of refugees in an urban setting. They don't have access to air conditioning. They don't have a place to charge their phone. We hosted language learning sessions for free, computer training sessions, job training, CV sessions and everything like that. So it was a lot of sort of day-to-day services for refugees as they come and go. And that varies quite differently. There are a lot of organizations that do that kind of work, and it's really important to find an organization that has really strong humanitarian values. It's very easy to do that kind of work in an unsustainable, oftentimes inadvertently detrimental way, which is very much why I pivoted to Red Cross, because they have so many checks and balances and quality is assured, and we are beholden to state regulations and federal law, so that we can make sure that we're truly protecting the clients that we serve and we're not risking anyone in any way. So I hope I answered that question, Brian. I realized again that was a lot. It's a very interesting experience, so I understand the curiosity there.
Well, you gave us a lot of very interesting information. I mean, I had no idea it was so vast, all the things.
Happy to chat about it.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. So do you want, so people, if they're interested in applying, they should go to the Americorps website? Or do you want them to contact you? Or do you want to type something in? Do you have access to the chat box?
I do. I will type in the email right now.
Okay, great. Maybe they should just contact you if you want them to contact you directly, or.
I am happy to have them contact me directly. I will obviously be advising them to go to our website so they can learn more information. So this is our website, and then even if you click into that website, you can find the application, but I'll just post the application as well, so it's very direct for everyone. Okay, here we go. This is our posting on the Americorps website itself. And then this is my email address if you've got questions about Red Cross or Americorps. Oops. Yes, okay. And you know what, I'll give my work phone as well. I haven't The phone's been relatively quiet given our virtual work. So you're welcome to reach out with questions, concerns. Once you do submit an application though, it will have to go through our formal process. So you likely won't be communicating with me anymore. You'd be communicating with my team member, Virginia Hopley, but we all have the same information. So we're happy to help you guys through the process.
Theodora, I just wanted to say thank you. I need to log off because I need to get ready for my next appointment.
Of course, thank you so much, Jaime. And I hope that the participants, got a little bit of information. This is a unique role. I definitely didn't know about it as an undergraduate student myself. So always happy to chat.
Well, I echo what Carol said. It was very informative and I learned new things too. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Great. Glad to hear it.
Well, I get, Theodora, I will let you go. I think people are starting to log off, but thanks everybody who attended, and you did a great job. I mean,
thank you so much.
You're a
I really
natural.
appreciate it.
Okay.
It's easy to talk about something that you enjoy. I feel very grateful to be in a role that's so meaningful and also so impactful. So thank you all so much. I hope to hear from some of you, and I hope you find, the best program, best post-graduation path for you all. So thank you all. Carol, it was great talking with you. I hope to hear from you soon.
Okay. Yeah, I will follow up with you, and yeah, thanings a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Go have lunch, drink some water.
Bye.
Okay. Bye now. Okay. Bye. I'm going to go. Okay.